Thanks everyone for having us here. Nick Kael, CTO of Ericom, and we'll be talking about remote browser isolation. It's our approach to zero trust internet browsing. So a little bit of background about Ericom. We really have two families of products. We have a family of products that's developed for secure application access. And then we also have what we call our secure web access. We'll be talking about more or less the secure web access today. And really, helps in a few areas around digital transformation, reducing complexity and cost, but also improving the user productivity while using the internet and the experience that they'll have with using the internet. And so, what a lot of our customers talk to us about is really kind of the known good, and they have the known bad, and those are fairly straightforward to deal with most of their security tools today. With the known good, right, we can allow our whitelists, and we create blacklists for the known bad or blocks in our systems for those known bad sites. The really tough area is actually on the unknown. A lot of times, what you'll see in the security products is what we call like uncategorized sites, new sites that are either fluxing up and down. So as those sites come up and they're uncategorized still, a lot of times your security tools will not know how to deal with those sites. You also have the concept of really overblocking, sometimes just to be cautious. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Some of the pain of underblocking, as you see, is a lot of the web-based attacks, increased by almost 60% in 2018. 42% of the breaches really take place with the browser. And so if you think about that, that's not including the, things like plugins and all kinds of other tools that we add to our browsers. Just the browser themselves, 42% of the attacks take place at that browser. Social engineering and phishing attacks, 85% of organizations now have experienced those. And again, with things like COVID-19 right now, these types of attacks are on the rise. Every time there's a large event, right, there's a rise in the social engineering and phishing attacks. 40% of malicious URLs found on good domains, so things like malvertising, where the ad ecosystem is breached basically by some malware or malicious content. And so the pain of overblocking, I touched on it a little bit, but I see a lot of organizations that what they do is just to be safe or be secure. What they do is they tend to block more than maybe what they need to, just out of precaution that they don't want to allow anything that's bad to slip through. It's a lot of time managing the policy and having your admins deal with your tools to create these policies and then live with them as you get a lot of support tickets and things asking you for opening sites, but also the loss of business productivity from your users. The users now are getting blocked on sites that maybe are legitimate sites that they need to go to for business. And so this creates a lot of issues for the end user. Remote browser isolation is what we'll be talking about today. It's really a preventative approach, or what we would call a zero trust approach to web security. And so when you look at our, the next gen firewalls, secure web gateways, and a lot of the other tools out there in the security industry, a lot of them have to detect. So what they're trying to do is scan the content or analyze that content in some way to use either signatures or some other method to try to detect whether it's malicious or not. So you'll see a lot of those types of tools where we don't do any detection. What we do is we assume everything's malicious. So we'll talk a little bit about how we isolate it from the endpoints as we go through the presentation. So you'll see here just some analyst data, but Gartner says there'll be about a 70% reduction in attacks or compromises against end user systems that use isolation. So pretty huge leap in security. It's really more or less a foolproof way of protecting the endpoint from malware at this point through the browser. So Zero Trust Browser Isolation Service. We neutralize all the web-based malware. Like I said, the phishing attacks, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about each one of these areas, but preventing malware, preventing those phishing or other types of malicious attacks, and also controlling the user's interactions with malicious downloads or any kind of download. To be honest, we can inspect that download and apply different policies to the download per the admin's wishes. So when we look at it to the far left here, we've got some malware embedded in or active content. That content is trying to be retrieved by the browser. Ericom takes that content and puts it into an isolated container. Think of it much like a VDI session for the browser. We take the browser and we pass it through a remote, connects to a remote browser. That remote browser is actually doing all the fetching of the internet content, and that internet content is then presented to the local browser in pixels, or we've got actually two methods. We either do pixel or what we call DOM. And so those methods will stream that content to the browser, but the person is actually viewing it on the remote browser. So just nothing interacting with the local browser on the user's machine or the operating system on that local machine as well. So what you'll see here is two examples. What we've got is a regular browser and what it looks like on the left, and we've got content passing through Ericom Shield on the right, and that's being viewed through what we call remote browser isolation. So really no difference in the appearance. The user's still able to interact with videos, click on links, fill out forms, the same type of web experience that they would have native in the browser. But the big difference that we see here is if you look at, behind the scenes, what's happening. The regular browser on the left, we've got a lot of code. I mean, there's in this one, or about the typical site, about 152 JavaScripts, 3 CSS scripts, and about 22 external URLs. And a lot of times that's how that malicious content, drive-by downloads, those types of things makes it into the browser, is through these types of external content that are fed into a website. By using Shield, you'll see that when we're passing through isolation, we significantly reduce the footprint of the JavaScript and the source of the code. And there'll be only a few URLs. And if you were, this is kind of hard to see at distance, I'm sure, but what really is in here is just enough code for Ericom to stream that content from the remote browser to the local browser. Stopping phishing attacks. Again, like I said, right now with any big event that takes place, there's a rise in phishing attacks and these types of social engineering attacks and things that happen. While we're passing the site through isolation, we can also add controls for phishing. And if we have a feed that comes into our product, we take some phishing feeds from different security vendors and bring it into the product. And what we can do then is either known or suspected phishing sites. What we can do is we can render the keyboard useless at that point, to where the user would not be able to input any credentials or information into a suspected phishing site. So we can prevent the users from being tricked into giving away information or giving away credentials in that phishing site. We talked a little bit earlier about preventing malicious downloads and file sanitization, what we call CDR, so content disarm and reconstruct. And what we'll do is we'll allow the user to still download just like they normally would files. You can set policies around this though, so if you do want to block completely things like executables and then analyze the content in other files, you have that ability to get granular on the policy. But the user tries to download it. At that point, we'll inspect it. Any active content in the document, it could be macros, links, videos, or other things that could be dangerous. What we'll do is we can strip that content out. We'll leave a stub behind saying that there was content removed. The file is then reconstructed. All the originals are saved and backed up in the server, so the admin still has the ability to retrieve those original files if the user does come back to you or let you know that the file is a valid business file and that macro or other content is actually legitimate. Maybe they've been accepting this same file for years, right? They get a finance spreadsheet or something that has macros in it. So you can still retrieve the original, but that user then would still be able to download the content risk-free. There's also different things like preview mode, where we can copy that, cut and paste that content into a PDF and allow them to preview it in a PDF viewer. So there's a few different modes that we can do around file handling. So here, what you'll see is that we typically are tied to or partnered up with, most commonly, the secure web gateway vendors or next-gen firewall vendors. And so pretty much, the entire list that you could think of the top tier vendors in both these categories we're partners with. And then what we can do is from that device or that technology, we can use their URL filtering, and we can make decisions based on what categories we want to isolate. Some people, we call this targeted isolation, or we can perform full isolation. We can also do that by things like Active Directory groups. Maybe you want your executives to go through full isolation while everyone else just goes through targeted. So for example, uncategorized sites, maybe all uncategorized, and maybe things like news sites or something else, you want to go through isolation. So the rest of your sites would go out natively to the internet. Also, you'd be able to still have your excuse me, whitelist, blacklist, and all those things from your secure web gateway or next-gen firewall, and then pass that content on to isolation. Basically, it becomes the traffic cop, the secure web gateway or next-gen firewall. So what I did was I tried to keep it as simple on the slides as we could. If there's more information that you guys want to discuss or go more in depth on the technical details behind remote browser isolation, we'd love to have you visit the Ericom booth to learn more. And that's it for my presentation. I thank you very much.
Nick, thank you very much. Just I look if we have questions from our listener.
Okay.
We don't have question.
Okay.
Give 1 minute, maybe
Sure.
someone write on the chat. У кого есть вопросы, пожалуйста, пишите в чат, мы их переведем и озвучим нашему спикеру. We don't have any questions, so thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
You have very interesting presentation.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.